First case was the annual German war games, particularly the fact that every year they were arranged so that the Kaiser would win no matter what he did. Von Moltke was convinced that the next European war would be an enormous bloody affair, consisting of millions of men and entire nations at arms. He did not think set-piece war games like Germany practiced were adequately preparing her for this sort of conflict.
Fair.
I'm going to quote a passage now from von Moltke's memoirs. And this is him talking to the Kaiser. And when I now look at the strategic war game plans which are put before your majesty year after year, regularly ending with the taking prisoner of enemy armies consisting of 500,000 or 600,000 men, and that too after only a few days of operations, I cannot avoid the feeling that this in no way meets the conditions of war. I cannot engage in such war games. Your majesty knows yourself that the armies led by you regularly encircle the enemy, and in this way allegedly end the war with one blow. In my opinion, these results can only be brought about by forcibly distorting circumstances in such a way that the basic principle that the war games should be a study for real war, and should take into account all the friction and obstacles that arise in war, is not met. This kind of war game in which, to a certain extent, your majesty's enemy is at your mercy, with his hands tied from the outset, must give rise to false ideas which can only be pernicious when war comes. But in my view, this is not the worst part of it. I hold it to be even more disturbing that the distorted war games have the effect of destroying their interest for the wide circle of officers involved. Everybody has the feeling that it doesn't matter what you do. A higher destiny controls the business and brings it one way or another to the desired conclusion. Your majesty will have noticed that it becomes increasingly difficult to find officers who want to exercise command against you. This is because, everyone says, I'll only be wiped off the map. However, what I complain about most, and what I must say to your majesty, is that because of all this, the officers' confidence in their supreme commander is severely shaken. The officers say that the Kaiser is much too clever not to notice how everything is arranged, and that he shall turn out to win, so that must be the way he wants it. Now, the Kaiser expressed shock to Moltke that things had been arranged this way, and claimed to have no idea that the war games he took part in every year were rigged.
I honestly believe that.
Yeah, I think he's just deluded.
Yeah, I think that he, I mean, it's like, given his upbringing and the fact that just no one has ever pointed anything out to him in his entire life, like, it tracks that he's like, wait a second, I'm not fucking the coolest person that's ever...
I'm not the best military leader in history?
Especially at this point where he's been in charge for so long, too. Like, no one has negged him in decades.
Yeah, not since Peter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Not a great thing.
No.
Now, from an early age, Wilhelm II had been obsessed with warships, like most boys. But unlike most boys, he came up to own a nation, and he was able to indulge in his obsession with naval boats. This quickly became a problem. See, England's thing was being the best at having a navy. Since they were a tiny country with a very tiny army, the Royal Navy was really the only thing that ensured Great Britain's safety. Germany was the unquestioned military master of Europe, and the only reason that Britain didn't worry more was that they had naval supremacy. But in 1897, Wilhelm made an admiral named Alfred von Tirpitz the Secretary of the Navy. Now, his reasons for this were simple. Tirpitz was good at praising the Kaiser and making him feel included in naval decisions. Tirpitz had realized on their first meeting that the Kaiser, quote, did not live in the real world, and had discovered that he could very easily manipulate the emperor by painting a lurid picture of a gallant and unstoppable high seas fleet. In 1897, the year after the Kaiser's disastrous Kruger telegram where he praised people for killing British soldiers, Germany passed its first naval bill, announcing a massive expansion of the fleet. Coming a year after the Kaiser praised one of Britain's enemies for defeating her soldiers, this was not seen as a friendly move.
No way. All right.
According to John Satir, a professor at the University of Virginia, quote, the Kaiser often indignantly denied that Germany was challenging Britain's domination of the seas, but there's clear evidence that this was in fact the aim of Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, whom he had made Secretary of the Navy in 1897. When in 1904, Britain settled its outstanding disputes with France, the Kaiser, at Bülow's suggestion, went to Tangier the following year to challenge France's position in Morocco by announcing German support for Moroccan independence. His hopes of thereby showing that Britain was of no value as an ally of France were disappointed at the 1906 Algiers conference, in which the Germans were forced to accept French predominance over Morocco. In 1908, William caused great excitement in Germany by giving, after a visit to England, a tactless interview to the Daily Telegraph, telling his interviewer that large sections of the German people were anti-English. He had sent the text beforehand to Bülow, who had probably neglected to read it, and who defended his master very lamely in the Reichstag. This led Wilhelm to play a less prominent role in public affairs, and feeling that he had been betrayed by Bülow, he replaced him with Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg. Bethmann's attempts to reach an agreement with Britain failed because Britain would not promise neutrality in a war between Germany and France unless Germany would limit its fleet. This the Kaiser and Tirpitz refused to do. So there's a chance to stop Britain from coming in against Germany in World War I, but he has to not build a shitload of boats, and the Kaiser really wants a shitload of toy boats.
I mean, and he's one, and again, you can track that way the fuck back. This man loves his boats.
He loves his fucking boats.
Jesus.
Now, that Moroccan crisis that was talked about in the quote above very nearly resulted in World War I breaking out in 1906. And in that case, the Kaiser and everyone were lucky that cooler heads were able to pull Europe's fat out of the fire. But the fact that things had gotten that close was evidence that the Kaiser's utter lack of competent ministers and gut-focused foreign policy was basically the world's deadliest game of dice. The series of bad decisions that would lead the world into blood-soaked calamity started in 1909, when Austria-Hungary announced the formal annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. These provinces had been administered by Vienna since 1878, but they were formerly part of the Ottoman Empire. When the Young Turk Rebellion swept the Ottoman Empire and imposed a constitution on the Sultan, Austria-Hungary saw it as a chance to right what they saw as a historical wrong. Now, the Ottoman Empire was allied with Germany, and that alliance was one of Wilhelm's very few successes. But the Kaiser was unhappy with the Young Turk Revolution because the constitution they forced on the Sultan was made an imitation of Great Britain, and Wilhelm took offense to this. Backing Austria-Hungary in this was an odd decision, especially given the fact that one of Wilhelm's later schemes was to try and win the Muslim world over to his banner. And we're going to talk about that. Before we talk about how Kaiser Wilhelm tried to win over the Muslims, let's talk about how these products and services are going to try to win over your dollars.
Ayo, smooth transition as usual, Robert.
Maybe my best, yeah. Products! We're back! Now, we're talking about Kaiser Wilhelm's attempt to make all the Muslims love him. That may seem weird, but there's logic behind it. See, the British Empire ruled a huge chunk of the Muslim world, and the French Empire did as well, and most of those Muslims were unhappy with this fact. If Wilhelm could earn their loyalty, he thought, it would provide him with another weapon to use against England. Friendship with the Ottomans also helped counter Germany's isolation, which was only a thing because Wilhelm sucked at diplomacy. In 1905, he said this, in the present very tense circumstances when we stand almost alone in the face of great coalitions which are being formed against us, our last trump card is Islam and the Mohammedan world. So Wilhelm saw the Young Turks and their Anglo-friendliness as an attack on his hard-won courtship of their empire, so he threw them under the bus to support Austria-Hungary's ambitions. This trend of supporting Austria-Hungary regardless of what it did would prove to be all of Europe's undoing, as Roll's biography notes. From then onwards, Kaiser Wilhelm ardently supported his allies' initiative and, as usual, overshot the mark in his martial enthusiasm. When the possibility of war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia loomed, he exclaimed, if only it would start! He was fully aware of the danger that Germany could be drawn into a war against France and Russia by a Balkan conflict. 13 years earlier, on November 1895, Wilhelm II had assured the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Count Ladislaw von... I'm not going to try to pronounce this fucker's name. The Austro-Hungarian ambassador, quite plainly, that he would stand at Austria-Hungary's side with all the forces at my disposal, without any further inquiry as to whether there's any cause for war that exists in accordance with our Treaty of Alliance. Your all-highest sovereign, Franz Joseph, may be quite sure that if at any moment the position of Austro-Hungarian monarchy is at issue, my entire fighting forces will be immediately and unconditionally at his disposal. So the Kaiser gives Austria-Hungary a blank check to do whatever they want, and this would wind up probably being the key mistake most responsible for plunging Europe into the First World War. Yeah.
Seems to be the popular opinion.
Yeah. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by a Serbian partisan in the summer of 1914, it made Austria's war against Serbia inevitable. Russia was bound to come to Serbia's defense, and the Kaiser had repeatedly promised, loudly and publicly, to back Austria-Hungary in any such war. Now, there'd been another Balkan crisis in 1912 and 13 that had almost led Europe off a cliff into war, but again, cooler heads had talked things down. This time, however, in 1914, there were fewer cooler heads available. For one thing, the Kaiser's best friend, Eulenburg, was no longer in the picture. A complex blackmail plot, orchestrated in part by pro-war elements in the German government, had been executed against Eulenburg. The chief cause for this was Eulenburg's pacifism. Once he was out of the picture, the Kaiser had no friends close to him who actually cared about him as a human being. Eulenburg was a lickspittle, but he was a lickspittle who legitimately had Wilhelm's best interest at heart and didn't want a war.
Sorry, can you unpack the term lickspittle?
Yeah, he's a sycophant. He's somebody who just is going to praise the leader and not going to question them too much.
Is that your word or is that someone else's word?
No. That's a common word. Yeah.
Well, says you.
I learned it from The Simpsons.
Says, oh, okay. Well, fine.
Now,
Continue.
with Eulenburg gone, the Kaiser's next best friend was Prince Max Egon of Baden, who was closely related to the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, which of course had drawn the Kaiser close to the Austrian royal family, which made him make more and more dumb promises. I'm simplifying things here by quite a lot because we only have so much time, but I think this paints the essential picture of what went on to bring Wilhelm to a point where he was willing to make these bad calls.
I mean, it is kind of remarkable just hearing it all out in order, like how long a massive conflict was avoided. Like there's so many close scrapes before something actually starts.
Yep. And there were a lot of other things going on. One of them was cold, ugly math. The German general staff had this fabulous plan cooked up by Schlieffen to win a two-front war in Europe, and they kept careful tabs on both the Russian and French armies. And they calculated that 1914 was basically the best year possible for them to have a war like this if it was inevitable, which they thought it was, because both nations had started revamping their field armies. So this exact sequence of events that led to the outbreak of hostilities in World War I is too long a story to fit in at the end of an episode, and Kaiser Wilhelm's exact level of blame is heavily debated to this day. Rolf's book paints him as an eager belligerent, wringing his hands in anticipation. He was not excited for war precisely, but he was excited for a major diplomatic victory that would humble Russia and Britain without the shot being fired.
Well, sure,
he understood that fighting. Yeah, exactly. He understood fighting might result, and he was willing to take that risk, but he didn't want it to come to that. He attempted to mediate between Austria and Serbia and was briefly optimistic of peace once the Serbians yielded to most of Austria's demands, but then his ally decided to go to war anyway, and the Kaiser backed him still. Now, Van der Kist's biography paints a more reticent picture of Wilhelm. His belligerent words and threats of violence were the same sort of impulsive passing fancies that had steered him his entire life. He was a rich kid with poor impulse control, but he ultimately didn't want war, and when it came, he was horribly anxious over the whole affair. Writing years later, Bülow recalled, "No German, and above all, no English pacifist, was filled with a profounder or more honest love of peace than was William II. It was his own and our misfortune that his words and his gestures never coincided with his real attitude in the manner. When he boasted or even threatened people in words, it was often because he wanted to allay his own timidity." I think that's right.
Yeah.
He's like he's an awkward, sad, insecure kid who winds up boasting and threatening because he's fundamentally insecure, and because he's a crowned head of a nation, it helps lead to war.
I feel like that does seem like kind of the story of World War I in a lot of ways, where it's like the social conflicts are generally directing stuff, but then the fucked up inbred leaders are able to be manipulated accordingly.
And there was a big debate, and has been it still continues, as to who was responsible for World War I. The nation of Germany was forced to take responsibility in the Treaty of Versailles, which was not fair. Germany and the Kaiser are not mostly responsible for World War I because there's so much blame to be shared by different nations. Sure. But you could make a strong case that the single individual with the largest share of the blame is Kaiser Wilhelm II. You can make that case.
Yeah, I mean, it was like he was. It feels like his whole life is setting him up to do this level of fuck up too.
Yeah, exactly.
You can see it coming from so far away. It's infuriating.
Yeah. Now, once war was joined, the Kaiser was hopeful that it would be a short, relatively bloodless affair and would leave the overall map of Europe relatively unchanged. He's not a Hitler type guy. He doesn't want to conquer France, and he doesn't want to own and hold Belgium forever. He wants to move through Belgium and then eventually leave. He wants to beat France in a war and then sign a treaty with them, take a little bit more of their land maybe, but he wants France to still exist. Yeah. He doesn't really want to destroy England as a nation. He doesn't want to conquer. He doesn't want to conquer the entire world.
No, he just wants to fuck his mom.
He wants to fuck his mom, and he wants to be seen as a military hero.
I mean, don't we all in a way?
Yeah. Now, we all in a way do.
Yeah.
Now, Wilhelm believed he'd be able to arrange peace when it was necessary at basically any point by just working things out one-on-one with his royal cousins. He noted that mere democracies could never make a peace conference work because war was a royal sport to be indulged in by hereditary monarchs and concluded at their will. Oh. This was part of the idea about war at the time, which was that war between kings never is that bad because kings are all friends at the end, and our soldiers will kill each other for a while, but I don't want you to lose your crown. I don't want things to be that bad for you. We're just having a spat, and once this is concluded satisfactorily, we can go back to being friends. Right. This is Wilhelm's idea at the start of this. Yeah.
Well, because he's like talking with his cousins. Like exactly. It's like being with just no awareness for the fact that there's a rest of the world that this affects.
Yeah, and this is not how things worked out.
No.
And World War I was instant. No. Like 250,000 Germans die in the first week of fighting.
Oh, shit.
Like it's like hundreds of thousands of people are dead as soon as the fighting starts.
Yeah.
And the Kaiser, as the situation grows more serious, the Kaiser is very quickly sidelined by his generals. He actually had almost no role in the conduct of the war throughout the vast majority of it.
Right.
It was basically ceremonial. He'd address factory workers and soldiers, and he spent a lot of his time on vacations at his farm. Germany increasingly became a military dictatorship, and by the end of it, the Kaiser was as much of a figurehead as the King of England. And of course, when the war ended in German defeat and 17 million deaths, Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate and flee the country. He spent the rest of his life in Doorn, in the Netherlands, living the quiet life of a country gentleman and a global pariah until his death in 1941 from being old as shit. In the end, I think the best epitaph for this man was written by journalist Charles Lowe, a foreign correspondent for the Times. He called Wilhelm, quote, the chief creator of the war spirit, which he found it impossible to exercise or resist, and was thus, so to say, devoured by his own offspring. For at the last moment, when shrinking from the results of his own creative handiwork, he allowed the sword, in his own phrase, to be thrust into his hand, which was just as much as if he had drawn it of his own accord, thus proving himself to be a weak-willed and criminal ruler, the most nefarious of his kind who ever sat upon a throne.
There it is, that hand comparison again. Sorry, you hate to see it. You hate to see it. The hand is back.
It all comes back to the fucking hands.
Oh, always back to hands with this guy. Well, yeah, what a coward that was set up to be a fucking loser that would cost millions of people their lives.
Yep. And that's why monarchists are the dumbest people in the world.
Yeah, they're horrible, and I hate that there's usually an end to feel kind of bad for them because you're like, why would you not be horrible? Why would you be good?
Monarchs, like the monarchs themselves, like absolutely, you have to have sympathy for a guy like Wilhelm because, like, fuck, man, there's no good ending to the story. Right. But like the people who want to go back to having a monarchy, it baffles me.
I can't figure. I'm like, do you just like tabloid? Like where
you like fancy costumes? That's what this shit's about.
I mean, like you can still have that. There's a lot of people that wear a lot of fancy. You should just start watching Drag Race. If you're a monarchist, just start watching Drag Race. You'll get what you want. And then,
so are you? Sorry.
No. I guess that's the end of my call to action for the monarchists.
Has your level of sympathy or feeling about Kaiser Wilhelm changed at all over the course of these episodes?
I honestly, my sympathy for him went up. Like I knew
Yeah.
I knew that everyone, all the monarchy like that were involved in the beginning of World War I were dumb as rocks, but
Yeah, dumb as a bag of dead horses.
but the specificity of like how they even got that far is it just sucks. It sucks. He just wanted his mom to be in love with him.
He just wanted to fuck his mom's hand and get a medal.
I feel for her and I feel for Germany, and that God, I'm not feeling as like indignant and angry as I usually am at the end of this. I'm just feeling I feel like a husk, Robert.
Yeah,
an absolute husk right now.
I watched an interesting movie on Netflix last night called The Exception, which is based on a book called The Kaiser's Last Kiss. And it's a fictional story about a German SS officer who is the head of Wilhelm's bodyguard when Germany conquers the country where he's staying at the start of the Second World War. And it's also about this like British spy. And the movie is more sympathetic towards Wilhelm than I think the book is. The guy who wrote the book